I understand that your mom is Chinese from Hong Kong and your father is Indian. So how do you end up being born and raised in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, wow, you've done your research. My dad was born in Zimbabwe and him and my mom actually met in London. So they were next door neighbors. I think that's so cute. Like if there was ever such a love story that could get any cuter, I don't think it's that, right? Yeah, so they met in London. They spent a few years there. They then went to Hong Kong, spent a few years working there, and then decided to move back to Zimbabwe, where my dad is from, and start their life there. And that's where I came along because my brother came along as well.
You were there until the age of 13, right?
Yeah, that's right. I remember a lot of it and I have really great memories of what it was. Obviously, it's very different now because of the political situation. And it's part of the reason why I haven't gone too soon enough is that I do have such good memories about it. But I know it's going to be a huge shock. At some point in my life, I do want to go back and I do want to see if there is anything that I can do there. I still have a bit of an attachment to the place. Unlike my brother, I think he was a little bit too young when we left, so he doesn't quite.
And was it a huge shock to move to Australia?
Yeah, it was a huge shock. It was a massive change. I think when I first got there, especially at that age, I think you don't really comprehend that you're leaving it potentially for good. And when I was growing up, I was fortunate enough to travel a lot when I was young. And so in my mind, it was just like another holiday. We got to Australia and then you're there for like a couple of weeks, still good. You're there for a couple of months, still good. And then you start school and it's okay. But then it starts to get to a point where you're like, okay, when are we going home now? When is the holiday over? And I think that's when it really hits you. But yeah, it was a massive difference. I mean, one of the reasons why, well, my dad says that he chose Australia and the Gold Coast in particular as a place to move to was because he said the weather was like Zimbabwe, which it's not. And it's just completely different. I mean, there's the beach, right? On the Gold Coast. Zimbabwe's a landlocked country. And there's so much different about it.
Was it hard to assimilate in terms of culture as well and race? I think you were the only brown skinned person as well in your school for a while.
Yeah, yeah. I always joke with people that I didn't know I was brown until I got to Australia, but it's true because I think you don't really, especially as a kid, pay attention to the color of your skin or anything like that. And then going to Australia, especially at the time when we first got to the Gold Coast, it wasn't as multicultural as it is now. I mean, now there are people all over the world working on the Gold Coast, and it wasn't as popular as some of the other bigger cities in Australia. And I think also in particular, our family looks a bit strange, right? So you're not used to seeing people who are like brown, let alone like, oh, there's a Chinese woman, there's an Indian man, and then like those kids, they're a bit different. And then you're going to like a little town outside of the Gold Coast, which is even more regional. Yeah, you definitely stand out. You definitely notice that you stand out.
I read that since you were young, you wanted to work at the UN. I wonder when that dream started. What was it that triggered that dream?
Yeah, I think it was seeing Kofi Annan do a speech, like one of his speeches, and he is probably the most inspiring speaker, right? He just captures people. He's very eloquent and gentle, I think, as well, with the way that he speaks. So I think that's what initially got my attention. And I think I also was drawn to it because it was so multicultural. Right? In my mind, like it's the United Nations, it's literally everybody on the planet. And I'm a very idealistic and optimistic person. So I think the idea of the UN as well just fits right in with my personality. And I'm like, wow, look at the potential of this thing. It could do so many exciting things for humankind. But I don't know when it first started. I think it was just a gradual thing. But I think I really felt it the most when I was deciding what to study at university. And in Australia, you get this book that you can flick through at all the different degrees, and then it tells you what job you've had and could potentially have at the end of it. And yeah, international relations has diplomats. And I was like, yeah, work for the UN.
These are
Yeah.
international relations, but you also had a second degree in business management, which is totally different.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Yeah, it is different. I don't know. Consciously at the time, I don't think I realized I was hedging my bets. It was more of being indecisive and trying to please everyone, if that makes sense. So the international relations, I think, was for me something that I really wanted to pursue. And then the business side was kind of for my parents. And then also just it's a safe degree in my mind. Age, I just felt a lot of pressure that whatever you study is going to be your career for the rest of your life. And so when you're making that decision, I was like, okay, if this is going to be the rest of my life, like, let me hinge my bets here.
I found it so interesting that when you speak about your dream of the UN, you were clearly so passionate, so excited. But then I saw while you were at university, you were doing all sorts of things that were not aligned at all with that dream. Like you were working to sell SK2 and Shiseido, and you were at agents. Like it's so different. So how did these things come about?
It's funny. I mean, I actually took a couple of years university. So I did go through a bit of a down period where I was kind of questioning why am I studying what I'm studying? I think it was multiple things. It was not knowing what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I think if you don't know why you're working towards something, it's really hard to continue and to keep doing what you're doing. So that was one of the things. The other thing is I'm definitely going through a down period of just not knowing anything about myself and not being confident in myself and going through a really down period. And I would say it's depression. I think there's a lot of preconceived ideas about depression. I think at some point everybody is going to go through a down period in their life. And it doesn't define you or anything that you do. And so that was my period for me. And I think the third factor was studying international relations. You basically see all the horrible parts of humanity. Like I went into studying this degree with obviously a very idealistic idea of what was going to come out from it, and ended up studying about wars and why, it's like different types of political issues and human rights treaties and things like that. And obviously when you're studying international law and human rights law, you're obviously looking at all the bad things that actually as part of that as well and reasons that they're coming about. And so I think I got very motivated about that. So yeah, I ended up taking a break and dropping out of university for a couple of years and figuring out, okay, what am I going to do next? And I remember just, scrolling for something interesting that I could be doing. And I came across this job ad, which was looking for brand ambassadors for different brands. And I went into the interview and it was like a group interview setting. And they were like, okay, as part of the interview process, you need to tell me something that you have with you right now. And that's basically how you get the job. Is you sell whatever you have. So everybody is selling things like their pen, their notebook that they were carrying with them. And me, literally the day before, had bought this pair of heels that I absolutely loved. It was so comfortable when I was wearing into the interview because I was just feeling so good about it. And so I got up and I was like, well, I want to sell you my heels. And I went into like all the benefits of my heel. They're really high. I'm a short person. Got all that ankle strap so you can like super comfortable, made of leather. So you can like basically got the job on the spot. And it ended up being something that I turned out I absolutely enjoy connecting with people and not necessarily, I guess, the selling part in terms of you doing it after a while becomes a bit boring, if that makes sense. Like you're not fully passionate about what you're selling. But yeah, during that time, it was great. So I got free alcohol, got free makeup. It was a fun job. I got to go to nightclubs and promote, different alcohol brands. It was great for that period.
So after that period of time, what was it that triggered a change?
I mean, I stayed in that job for a few years, ended up working out from being a brand ambassador to managing the state to Queensland. So managing all the other brand ambassadors. And that was great. I mean, I got to work with some really awesome brands, not just in terms of selling them, but understanding how they market things, managing the accounts and relationships with people as well. A lot of project management and logistics, like especially executing these are like on the ground marketing. So I learned a lot, but it got to a point where that job was insane. So during the week, you have all the beauty and cosmetic type promotion. And then over the weekend and the evenings, you have all the FMCG, like alcohol type promotion. So essentially, you're working 24/7 because you have to manage all of that. And in my early 20s, I was managing 200 staff across state. These are all casual staff. So they can call you 5 minutes before the start of their shift and be like, oh, I'm sick. I can't go. And towards the end, one of my breaking points, this guy called me. It was literally 5 minutes before the start of his shift and said, I don't have the right shirt for my shift. Like he's meant to be wearing white pants out of home. I was like, okay, any other pants? Blue, black, no. Like, what do you say to that? And I think also when you're young, early 20s, you don't have the confidence to be like, this is your job. You signed up for the shift, you're going to the shift. And I just had a bit of I think that was a breakdown. It was just like, I've had enough of this. Also, I think with the hours, it was oftentimes us standing at the back of the room, friends' engagement parties, birthdays, and things like that, like always on my phone, coordinating different trips and things like that. Yeah. So it got to a point where it was just too much. And then I started to rethink about, okay, I need to do something else. I need to get out of this environment. Apart from all of those little things that were happening, we had this big Justin Bieber promotion. I will always remember this. Every time I see Justin Bieber or anything, you'll always remember this. We didn't have enough t-shirts for all of the brand ambassadors to go around. It's such a stupid problem, but like, it ends up being such a big thing. We didn't have enough t-shirts to go around, and so everybody had to swap t-shirts. So someone was always branded when they're working a shift. And the people who were promoting Justin Bieber happened to see one of the staff members in my state didn't have a Justin Bieber shirt because we didn't coordinate switches quick enough. And it ended up being a massive problem that my boss called me from Sydney yelling at me. And I just started crying on the phone. And I was like, oh, this is not healthy. This is not what a work environment should be. So yeah, it was all of that. It was just a breaking point.
And after that breaking point, how did you figure out how to change your life?
I don't think I consciously knew what I was doing at the time. I just knew in my gut that I needed to heal. I actually ended up going to the doctor, and the doctor said, you have anxiety. You need to see a therapist. And I tried like on and off, like school counselor and all that kind of stuff. But never really enjoyed therapy in any way. I felt like they just created more problems than they solved. But my gut knew I was at a breaking point. I needed help. And so I remember coming out of the doctor's office, and right there, right next door, was a psychiatrist. And I literally just walked into the office, and the lady there behind the counter, I just started grilling her all these questions like, how do I know if I can find the right one? All the questions that I probably would have never asked before. And after that great 10-minute grilling, I was like, okay, I think I'm going to come to the workplace. And it turned out she was the owner of it. And so I ended up like signing up with her. And she was, I think, made the biggest impact on my life and still does. I think a lot of the things that she taught me, I still do. So yeah, I think that is what kickstarted it. And then also knowing in my gut that I needed different work environments. And then also kind of realizing that I think I'm ready to go back to university and finish that off and just get the piece of paper. I think at that mind, I shifted my perspective to away from it being like a massive career decision that I'm making after having some work experience under my belt to the university degree just being a piece of paper that's going to open doors for me. And that was the motivation that I needed to just get back into it.
And when you got that piece of paper, did it help you to open the doors that you wanted?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in Singapore because of that piece of paper. 17-year-old me literally chose that university because they had nice trees on campus. That's crazy. It turns out that the visa that I needed to get, or you have to have graduated from a university that ranks in 100 globally. And my university did, thankfully, which is how I ended up getting my visa here initially.
So that visa you're talking about, it's for the UN internship that you applied for, which would last for 3 months. How did the idea of applying for an internship come about?
One of my friends, he's Singaporean and he was living in Brisbane and he was moving back to Singapore. And he was like, you know what? I'm not going to Singapore. You should come to. So I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. What have I got to lose, right? So I ended up like researching or reaching out to a lot of people here. What's it like to live in Singapore? Before that, I'd only been here a really short stopover, so I didn't really know much about Singapore before that. And one of my friends from college was living here, and she got back to me and said, UN Women has internships. The best way to get a job in Singapore is to actually be here. Why don't you apply for the internship? And then if you get it, you come here and network while you're here. Hopefully,
I read that once you got the internship, they actually told you, full disclosure, you were not going to get a job after this. How did you feel?
yeah.
Because that was your ultimate aim. You wanted a job.
Yeah, I think there was initial disappointment because you always hope. Back in your mind, you're always hoping. But it was a conversation that I actually had with my then boyfriend, now husband. And this was also while I was trying to decide whether I come to or I stay in Australia because, there was stipend of the internship. It's a really small stipend and I would integrate all of my savings. So we had a discussion about it and he said to me to look at the worst case scenario. And in that particular scenario, the worst case scenario for me is that, okay, I go for the internship, it ends after 3 months, nothing happens. And so I end up having to go back to Australia. I'm going to probably choose through savings. So I need to live with my parents. And then I need to find another job and I need to find a job quickly. And it's probably going to be a job that I don't really like. But I was already in a job that I didn't like, and I really like my parents. So living with them is not a problem. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm comfortable with my worst case scenario. And so he's like, if you're comfortable with your worst case scenario, you can do whatever you want. And that has really impacted how I make all of my decisions now. So yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I moved over here. I'm actually really excited about the 3-month internship because I'm like, the UN. I remember my first day, I turned out, I think it was like 9 a.m. on the dot, like standing out there, ready to go, so excited, knocked on the door, nobody's there because the office only opens at 10 a.m. Such like when you're around neighborhood and you live in Singapore, you understand this. Everything literally only opens at 10 a.m. But yeah, that's kind of how.
Was the internship everything you thought it would be?
Yeah, it was. I think it was more than what I thought it would be. I had no idea what I was getting into when I signed up for the internship. It was my first exposure to the whole social entrepreneurship world. And so I was really excited by all of it. Like see all of these different solutions that all of these entrepreneurs all over the world are creating different types of business models or different models for running an organization and all the different types of social issues that they're solving as well. I think it was the part of what motivated me to be interested in the whole UN and international relations thing. Like I found that in the full social entrepreneurship world. So it was more than what I expected it to be.
So how did you end up that you were there for a 3-month internship? You end up spending just over 3 years and you were also the head of corporate partnerships at the UN.
Yeah. So what happened was when I had applied for my internship, you're right. They said there's no chance you're going to get a job here. We typically only bring in new grads as interns, and it's really low. Fine, doesn't matter. I'm just going to use it through groups to network and live my life. So a month into my internship, my manager resigned, and I already had a lot more work experience than the other interns. And so, yeah, I applied for the role. And I mean, apart from being the one who's already kind of working on projects, understanding the role, I was probably the cheapest option because they hired for someone quite senior, right? And I was just like coming in undercutting the competition.
One of the big things that you were in charge of is this thing called Project Inspire. Can you share a bit about what that is?
Yeah, so Project Inspire was a global social entrepreneurship program for women and girls around the world. So we were looking for solutions from all around the world that were impacting women and girls differently. And it did have a little bit of a skew towards financial inclusion, financial literacy. But the program was in partnership with MasterCard. It was also a youth program. So we were looking for people between 18 to 35. I think I ran it for about 3 years. It became such a massive competition by the end of it. We had a boot camp part of it as well. So basically, you get thousands of applications coming in, similar to, I guess, what I'm doing now. an evolution of what I'm doing now. But you get a lot of applications, read the application, bring over the finalists, run them through a boot camp, a pitching competition, and goes with $25,000. And there's some other grants as well. It was exciting. It's a lot of hype as well. And I think for many of these people, like the entrepreneurs that we were working with, many of them were women and from emerging markets as well. This would be their first time in Singapore. A lot of them, we had to coordinate all of the logistics of getting a passport. How do they get to the airport and then landing in Singapore? Whole big thing for them. So I think that's something that I always remember and that always brings a smile to my face. It's just how exciting it all was.
You said massive. Under your stewardship, the program went from 8 to over 109 new geographies that were involved in the project. How do you manage to expand so rapidly in 3 years?
Had a really great team. That's for sure. We had a really great team of people who were super passionate about this as well. We also rolled out a couple of new things tested out. One was accepting applications in different languages. That was difficult, like really difficult logistically to do because you need to essentially translate everything out of it. When we said we were going to do it, we didn't realize logistically how much translation you actually have to do and for it needs to continue through the entire part of the program, right? You can't just accept applications in one language. You have to go through the entire process. I think that was one. The second thing was we brought on country ambassadors. So our team is a really small team headquartered in Singapore, and there was no way that we can really be on the ground and scout for these social entrepreneurs, spread the word about what we were doing, and effectively as someone who was already there and that was already embedded. So we recruited country ambassadors who were people who were super passionate about the whole social entrepreneurship space. And maybe they didn't qualify for what we were doing. They were kind of embedded in the community and happy to refer people in. But it grew to such a big program that we had country ambassadors who were doing media interviews on behalf of us in their home countries. They were hosting streaming parties. So when we would live stream the finals of the event and someone from their country would be in the finals pitching, they'd have this whole event where they could watch the whole thing. So I think that's kind of what you really realize is that, especially in the space that I'm working in right now, $25,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money, but it is a lot of money. For a lot of people, it's a lot of money. And when you see how it can make such a difference in people's lives, it spurs you on, it gets you more motivated to do more.